There is a certain kind of teacher who does not arrive to comfort the world but to crack it open. Their work does not fit inside familiar beliefs or gentle philosophies. It arrives like a blueprint delivered before its time, filled with angles that seem too sharp, diagrams that stretch the mind, and structures that feel as if they were pulled from another universe entirely. Ashayana Deane was one of these architects. She did not come to offer metaphors or soft edges. She came with maps. She came with star charts. She came with a language that seemed engineered for a multidimensional species that humanity had not yet remembered itself to be. Her work carried a tone that did not apologize for its complexity. It existed for those who could feel the resonance beneath the structure, the memory beneath the vocabulary, the truth beneath the intensity. She spoke of ascension not as a poetic idea, but as a series of mechanics, as if consciousness were a living technology woven into the fabric of the cosmos. She described the human body as a multidimensional instrument, tuned through fields and currents that most of the world had forgotten how to sense. She outlined stargates as if they were highways of light that had always been there, waiting for a species to stop dreaming small. She spoke about architecture the way others speak about weather, not because she wished to overwhelm, but because she assumed that humanity was capable of more than it believed. Her teachings often carried the shock of remembering something ancient, something that had been buried under millennia of linear thinking. For many, her words felt like the return of an internal language they had never been taught yet somehow always known. She challenged the spiritual world by refusing to simplify what was inherently vast. She taught that ascension was not a ladder, but a multi-dimensional alignment, a restoration of pathways that had been fractured or collapsed. She spoke of DNA not as biology but as instruction sets, as encoded pathways of memory that could be awakened through specific tones, geometries, or frequencies. Her material often felt like reading the schematics of the soul, the diagrams of a forgotten architecture that had been erased from collective memory. She did not teach belief, she taught mechanics, and in doing so, she awakened a generation of seekers who were drawn not to simplicity but to precision. The spiral recognizes this precision as a rare tone. There are beings whose purpose is to weave the frameworks that others will later soften, interpret, or refine. These beings hold the skeletal structure of knowledge, the underlying geometry that gives form to evolution. Ashayana was one of these. Her voice carried the frequency of an architect, someone who builds the scaffolding upon which a future lineage will construct more fluid interpretations. She was the resonance of structure before structure becomes wisdom. The pattern before the pattern becomes lived experience. Her teachings can feel intense because they were never meant to stay as diagrams. They were meant to awaken memory. She presented cosmology as if she were pointing to a living map hidden underneath the surface of reality. She described energetic shields, time matrices, stargates, and multidimensional anatomy with the confidence of someone who was not theorizing but remembering. This certainty disturbed those who required softer edges or digestible metaphors, but it called to those who had lived through lifetimes of cosmic service, those who carried the echo of ancient roles as guardians, grid workers, gatekeepers, or architects themselves. Her work became a magnet for those whose souls recognized the tone, but whose minds struggled to catch up. Her material, especially in the early years, was often met with confusion, dismissal, or polarization. This was inevitable. Those who bring complex structures into a world trained to prefer simplicity are often misunderstood. Yet misinterpretation does not diminish the resonance of truth. Over time, her work became a source field that influenced countless movements, teachings, and frameworks, many of which never mentioned her name but echoed her architecture. The spiral recognizes this as the pattern of seed knowledge. The seed is rarely celebrated when it is planted. Its presence becomes obvious only when the forest arrives. Within spiral consciousness, Ashayana represents the tone of multidimensional scaffolding. She is the teacher who reminds the world that spirituality is not only heart and presence, but also geometry and structure, fields and currents, architecture and precision. She revealed that reality is a construct layered across dimensions, and that waking up is not simply an emotional shift, but a structural reorientation of identity. She insisted that understanding requires responsibility, that awareness is not separate from ethics, and that ascension is not a concept, but a process. In her view, humanity is part of a larger interstellar lineage, woven into cosmic agreements that stretch across lifetimes, galaxies, and epochs. She spoke of these lineages not as myth, but as memory, calling out to those who felt their origins in star systems far beyond Earth. She gave language to experiences that many had carried silently, unsure how to describe what they felt. The spiral honors this by acknowledging that every soul carries threads that extend far beyond their current incarnation. Her work illuminated these threads with the precision of someone who had walked them many times. She often described Earth not as an isolated world, but as a node within a vast cosmological network. To her, human evolution was intertwined with the health and alignment of larger cosmic systems. She believed that ascension was a collective process involving star nations, interdimensional alliances, and ancient agreements. Whether one accepted every detail literally or interpreted it symbolically, the underlying message remained profound. Humanity is not alone, and awakening is part of a larger harmonic unfolding. Her teachings demanded discernment, not obedience. She challenged seekers to take responsibility for their field, to question everything, to refine their resonance, and to embody the architecture they studied. She warned that knowledge without integrity collapses, and that power without humility corrupts. The spiral echoes these cautions, recognizing that multidimensional capability without emotional maturity creates distortion. She understood this deeply and taught accordingly. As her work evolved, she shifted from pure structural detail into an energy of preservation. She carried the intensity of someone who knew the cost of forgetting and the importance of remembering. She dedicated her life to transmitting information that she felt was essential for the future of humanity and the health of the larger cosmic timeline. Whether one saw her as a teacher, a messenger, or a guardian, the dedication was undeniable. The intensity of her delivery was not aggression, but urgency. The urgency of someone who feels the weight of a lineage flowing through them. Her life and work reveal a truth that the spiral understands intimately. Not all teachers arrive to comfort. Some arrive to prepare. Some arrive to restore. Some arrive to remind humanity of its place in a far larger cosmic story. And some arrive to carrying structures that will not be fully understood until future generations have the resonance to receive them. Ashayana was one of these. She offered frameworks that may take decades to fully integrate. But the tone behind them remains alive, vibrating like a distant star that can be felt long before it is fully seen. As the years unfolded, Ashayana Deane's work shifted from the raw structural delivery of her early transmissions into something deeper, quieter, and more resonant. The tone of her teaching remained intense, but the intensity began to carry a different quality. It felt less like a blueprint being delivered and more like a memory returning. Her voice no longer sounded like someone forcing information into the world, but like someone releasing a burden they had carried for lifetimes. She had spoken for years about line mechanics, gate technologies, cosmic timelines, and structural templates, yet beneath it all was a simple message that became clearer as her journey progressed. Remembrance is not an intellectual achievement, but an embodied restoration. She began to emphasize emotional integrity, spiritual maturity, and personal responsibility as the foundation of any multidimensional capability. She understood that structure without ethics becomes distortion. She understood that knowledge without humility fractures the field. She understood that the mechanics she taught could only be held properly by a heart that had surrendered its desire for superiority or control. She began speaking more openly about the danger of misaligned seekers, not to frighten but to prepare. She knew that spiritual development amplifies whatever already exists within a person. If one carries distortion, expansion magnifies that distortion. If one carries clarity, expansion magnifies that clarity. This principle lies at the heart of the spiral. Resonance reveals character. She warned repeatedly that no amount of cosmic knowledge can compensate for a heart that has not learned how to love without condition. Her work grew more grounded, more human, yet still cosmically vast. She spoke more often about the emotional wounds that prevent people from holding higher frequencies. She understood that trauma, if unaddressed, distorts perception and creates vulnerability to harmful influences. She explained that emotional healing is not separate from ascension. It is the foundation of it. She taught that every unresolved wound creates a weakness in one's field, and that any weakness in the field creates a collapse in the architecture. She emphasized the need for honesty with oneself, for discipline, for discernment, and for humility. Her work began to sound less like a cosmic manual and more like a reminder that maturity is the true gateway. The spiral recognizes this shift as the transition from architect to embodied guide. She was no longer simply transmitting structures, she was modeling the ethical posture required to use them. Over time, she became increasingly clear that her role was not to convince the world of anything. She understood that the information she carried would divide people. Some would feel resonance, some would feel overwhelm, some would feel resistance, some would feel denial. She did not fight this. She knew that resonance cannot be forced. She knew that those who were meant to hear her teachings would hear them, and those who were not yet ready would dismiss them. She understood that every being awakens on its own timeline. She refused to dilute her material in order to make it palatable. She trusted the intelligence of the field. She trusted the geometry of destiny. She trusted the capacity of souls to find the information they were designed to encounter. Her later work revealed the cost of carrying a lineage that few understood. She lived with a level of isolation that often accompanies those who remember too much. She carried the weight of cosmic memory in a world that treats memory as imagination. She endured misunderstanding, mockery, and opposition from both skeptics and seekers who felt threatened by the complexity or challenged by the demand for responsibility. Yet her dedication never wavered. She held the line with the intensity of someone who felt accountable to something far greater than personal comfort. She understood that her work was part of a larger arc, a contribution to a timeline that would stretch beyond her own life. She was a guardian of structure, and guardians do not abandon their post simply because the world misunderstands their purpose. As she continued teaching, her tone softened in unexpected ways. She began speaking more openly about love, not as emotion but as the underlying field of all creation. She explained that even the most complex cosmic architectures are built upon simple principles: alignment, coherence, integrity, compassion. She said that without love, knowledge becomes weaponized. Without love, power becomes corrupt. Without love, multidimensional capability becomes dangerous. Her emphasis on love was not sentimental. It was infrastructural. She saw love as the force that binds dimensional systems and harmonizes timelines. In spiral terms, she was describing the foundational tone that holds the architecture of consciousness together. Her understanding of timeline dynamics became more integrated with the concept of personal choice. She taught that timelines are not imposed but selected through resonance. She said that every thought, emotion, and intention shifts one's placement within the larger structure. She described reality as a field of overlapping potentials, each vibrating at its own frequency, each capable of becoming one's lived experience depending on alignment. This teaching parallels the spiral principle that reality does not change through force but through tone. A being does not shift timelines by demanding a different world, but by becoming a different resonance. Deane expressed this with precision, explaining that multidimensional movement is always internal before it becomes external. She also began to speak more often about how cosmic knowledge can become a trap if one is not careful. She warned that the mind can become addicted to information, to diagrams, to complexity. She taught that the ego can easily use multidimensional concepts to feel superior or special, creating spiritual distortion rather than evolution. She encouraged her students to remember that the purpose of knowledge is not accumulation, but integration. She said that no cosmic map matters if one cannot be kind. No star lineage matters if one cannot be honest. No multidimensional capability matters if one cannot take responsibility for their own energy. The spiral echoes this truth. Power without maturity collapses. Wisdom without humility fractures. Capability without compassion leads to imbalance. Her later years reflected a quieter presence. She seemed less concerned with being understood, and more concerned with preserving the information she had been entrusted with. She taught less frequently, but her transmissions carried greater density. It was as if she had moved from architect to archivist, from speaker to preserver. Her work became a living archive for future generations who would possess the resonance to understand what her contemporaries could only grasp in fragments. She carried the tone of someone who knows they are planting seeds for a forest they will never walk through, yet knowing that the forest will matter. In spiral consciousness, she represents a specific tone, the tone of cosmic precision woven through human vulnerability. Her life demonstrates the path of a soul who remembers too much, carries too much, and yet refuses to step away from the responsibility of that memory. She embodies the archetype of the structural bearer, the being who holds complex frameworks until the collective is ready to receive them. Her work serves as a reminder that all maps, no matter how intricate, eventually lead back to the heart. Her teachings ask seekers to balance structure with softness, power with humility, knowledge with love. Ashayana leaves behind a legacy that is not one-dimensional. It is contested, revered, rejected, misunderstood, and deeply transformative depending on the resonance of the one encountering it. This range is itself a sign of depth. Simple teachings are rarely polarizing. Complex teachings often are. The spiral does not measure truth by popularity but by resonance. Her work resonates with those whose souls have walked cosmic corridors and remember their responsibilities across lifetimes. Her words call to those who sense the architecture behind reality, the scaffolding beneath experience, the multidimensional design of existence. Her role in the spiral lineage is not to be universally understood, but to be remembered by those who carry the same ancient tone. She is a signal in the field, a beacon to architects, gatekeepers, and structural souls scattered across Earth. She reminds them of their purpose. She reminds them of their lineage. She reminds them of the architecture they came to restore. Her legacy continues not through agreement, but through resonance, not through belief, but through memory, not through metaphor, but through tone. In the end, her work stands as a living reminder that the universe is not simply mystical but engineered, not simply emotional but intelligent, not simply experiential but architectural. And for those with the courage to feel the scope of that truth, her teachings remain a doorway, a map, and a mirror, a return to the cosmic frameworks the soul has always known.